I'm Alistair Bailey, 42 years old, and for the past 15 years I've been a senior sales director at one of the largest software firms in the industry. Over that time, I've built and maintained a pipeline that consistently delivers upwards of $3.8 million annually in prospective revenue. My role demands not just the ability to close deals, but a deep, nuanced understanding of client needs, contractual obligations, and the technical systems that underpin our licensing agreements. I'm known in the company for my reliability, precision, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Documentation isn't just a formality for me. It's a foundational part of how I operate, ensuring every interaction, every agreement, and every access credential is recorded and stored securely. This meticulousness became even more critical when I faced a situation that would test both my professionalism and my capacity to protect what matters most: my family. A few weeks ago, my father passed away unexpectedly. The loss was devastating, and naturally I requested the standard 4-day bereavement leave offered by the company's policy. It was a straightforward, reasonable request, one I assumed would be granted without issue given my tenure and track record. After all, emergencies happen, and the company's official guidelines explicitly included bereavement as a protected leave category. To my surprise, and frankly to my disappointment, the request was denied by Human Resources. Margaret Lawson, the HR director, personally delivered the news. Understood, but due to current business needs, we cannot approve bereavement leave at this time. There was no flexibility, no acknowledgement of the personal gravity of the situation, just a cold, firm refusal grounded in what they called business priorities. The tone was professional, but the message was clear. Work comes first, family second. I responded with a calm, measured, understood. In that moment, I knew that any emotional reaction would be counterproductive, particularly in a corporate environment that values composure and measured responses. That night, after leaving the office, while the company believed I was simply on leave and inactive, I quietly set to work leveraging my unique position. I have exclusive control over critical client licenses and system access credentials that form the backbone of our software deployment and revenue recognition. These aren't just administrative details. They are the foundation of the company's $3.8 million pipeline and, importantly, tied directly into the payroll systems that ensure employees get paid. The licenses grant clients access to the software products, and without proper authorization and validation, those clients face service disruptions. With careful precision, I initiated a discreet transfer of these licenses and access credentials. This wasn't a rash act of rebellion. It was a calculated move to protect my family's financial future in the face of corporate indifference. I documented every step meticulously, ensuring a clear trail of evidence and maintaining full operational control. This quiet transfer was designed to be seamless, avoiding immediate detection, but guaranteeing that the company's internal systems, reliant on this access, would eventually experience disruption. At no point did I engage in confrontation or emotional appeals. Instead, I relied on professional discipline, maintaining detailed records, adhering strictly to legal and contractual parameters, and executing the transfer with technical exactness. I understood the risks and the potential backlash, but I also recognized that the company's refusal to recognize my legitimate need for leave was not only unjust, but strategically short-sighted. By controlling the very licenses that enabled the company's revenue stream and payroll, I had leverage they overlooked. That night marked the beginning of a professional standoff. I chose to prioritize my family's well-being and financial security over a rigid corporate mandate. The quiet transfer was my way of saying that while the company might disregard human needs, I would use my expertise and authority to ensure those who depend on me are protected. The subsequent days would reveal how deeply interconnected our operational dependencies were, and how HR's cold calculus failed to account for the consequences of denying basic employee rights. What they saw as a simple no would become a systemic disruption with far-reaching professional implications. In this narrative, I'm not just a sales director. I'm a professional who understands that documentation, contract ownership, and system control are powerful tools. When corporate policies become inflexible and unjust, these tools form a strategic foundation for measured, effective action. That night, by quietly transferring the licenses and system access, I wasn't acting out of spite. I was acting out of responsibility and foresight, ensuring the stability of what truly sustains the family I prioritize above all else. Over the course of my 15-year career, I've steadily climbed the ranks from a junior account manager to my current position as senior sales director. Early on, I quickly realized that success in sales wasn't just about closing deals or hitting quarterly targets. It was about building lasting relationships grounded in trust, transparency, and thorough documentation. From managing a handful of accounts, I gradually took on increasingly complex client portfolios. Today, I personally oversee a set of key clients whose combined contracts generate a pipeline valued at approximately $3.8 million annually. This pipeline isn't just a number on a report. It represents ongoing revenue streams that the company depends on, and more importantly, clients whose satisfaction and continuity are critical for the firm's reputation and financial health. What set me apart within the organization was my proactive approach to managing these relationships and the technical intricacies tied to our software licensing. Unlike many sales professionals who focus solely on negotiations and client communication, I developed a deep understanding of the licensing agreements themselves. Each client's license is governed by specific contractual clauses detailing access rights, renewal terms, usage limitations, and compliance obligations. I maintained exclusive ownership of these license agreements in the company's records, ensuring that every document, from initial contract drafts to signed amendments, was accurately filed and easily retrievable. This rigorous record-keeping wasn't just bureaucratic diligence, it was a strategic safeguard that preserved not only client trust, but also legal clarity in case of disputes or audits. Beyond contracts, I also managed sensitive system credentials that enabled clients to access our software products. These credentials are the keys to the company's operational infrastructure. Without proper authentication, client software installations cannot validate licenses, leading to immediate service disruptions. Because of my deep involvement, I was granted exclusive administrative privileges to oversee the issuance, renewal, and deactivation of these credentials. This control places me in a unique position of responsibility. Any misstep could jeopardize client service, revenue recognition, and ultimately payroll calculations linked to commission structures and expense reimbursements. I never took this lightly. Every access change, every license update was carefully logged, with backups stored securely and redundancies in place to prevent accidental loss or unauthorized access. My meticulous documentation extended to client communications as well. Every negotiation email, every agreed-upon contract revision, and every technical clarification was archived. This created an unbroken chain of evidence that reinforced my credibility and protected both the company and clients from misunderstandings. Moreover, this level of detail ensured that when I handed off accounts, whether temporarily or permanently, there was always a clear, traceable history to support ongoing service continuity. This comprehensive approach to managing client licenses and system access not only secured my position as an indispensable part of the revenue generation process, but also made me a critical linchpin in the company's operational ecosystem. My detailed knowledge and exclusive control meant that the company relied heavily on my expertise and integrity. While this status brought professional rewards, it also meant that when corporate HR began enforcing rigid policies, prioritizing cost control over employee welfare, I became an unintended target in their broader strategy. When the bereavement leave request was denied, it wasn't just a personal affront. It was a trigger that revealed a fundamental disconnect between HR's narrow policy enforcement and the operational realities I managed. Their refusal failed to recognize how intertwined my role was with the company's revenue pipeline and critical system functions. Yet, I understood that emotional reactions would be counterproductive. Instead, I reflected on the value embedded in my role, the contracts, the credentials, the documented pipeline, and began considering how this unique leverage could be used strategically. Throughout the years, I had built a professional identity grounded in reliability and detailed oversight. My colleagues and clients trusted me, because I consistently demonstrated that I could be counted on to manage complex portfolios with precision and professionalism. This reputation was not accidental. It was the product of deliberate effort to maintain transparency, uphold contractual obligations, and safeguard operational integrity. It was this meticulously maintained professional foundation that would later become the bedrock of my strategic response to the HR denial. In summary, my professional background is more than a timeline of promotions and sales achievements. It's a testament to the importance of deep domain knowledge, rigorous documentation, and exclusive operational control in safeguarding not only company revenue, but also ultimately the well-being of the family I support. This foundation set the stage for the next phase of my response, leveraging these assets methodically to protect what truly matters in the face of rigid corporate indifference. Margaret Lawson, the HR director, was a consummate professional who had risen through the ranks by adhering strictly to company directives and corporate mandates. Yet her approach was emblematic of a broader shift in corporate culture, where rigid policies, cost-cutting imperatives, and productivity metrics were prioritized above individual circumstances. Under mounting pressure from executive leadership to reduce overhead and maximize output, Margaret had adopted a hardline stance on leave policies, including bereavement leave. The company's ongoing restructuring efforts demanded leaner operations, and any perceived absence that could disrupt workflow was treated as a liability rather than a necessity. When my request for the standard 4-day bereavement leave landed on her desk, Margaret viewed it through the lens of risk management and operational continuity. Despite company policy explicitly allowing bereavement leave, she saw my absence as a potential bottleneck in meeting quarterly revenue targets, especially given the critical timing of several ongoing client negotiations. With a firm but detached tone, she conveyed that business needs must come first, leaving no room for exceptions. Her message was clear. The policy was non-negotiable, and granting leave would set an unwelcome precedent amid heightened scrutiny on employee downtime. What Margaret failed to appreciate, however, went beyond the personal impact of denying leave. She fundamentally misunderstood the architecture of operational dependencies tied to the client licenses I managed. These licenses were not simply contractual paperwork. They were embedded in proprietary licensing systems that controlled software access and, by extension, the recognition of revenue streams. From a legal perspective, the license agreements included clauses transferring ownership rights to me upon termination or suspension of service contracts, a fact Margaret either overlooked or deliberately ignored. This meant that control over these licenses was not a mere formality, but a legally significant asset directly linked to the company's financial health. On the technical front, the system required active validation of these client licenses to maintain uninterrupted service. My administrative credentials were uniquely provisioned to manage these validations, renewals, and revocations. This exclusivity was by design, a safeguard to prevent unauthorized access and ensure compliance with licensing terms. Derek Caldwell, the IT manager and my trusted colleague, fully understood this critical dependency. He had often cautioned HR about the risks inherent in ignoring system controls, emphasizing how any disruption in license management could cascade rapidly into service outages and revenue loss. Unfortunately, Derek's technical warnings fell on deaf ears within the HR and executive ranks, which prioritized cost and workforce metrics over IT contingencies. Margaret's oversight was twofold. First, she underestimated the legal ramifications of denying leave in the context of state bereavement statutes and company policy. Second, she failed to recognize the operational leverage embedded in my exclusive control over client licenses and system access. Her decision was narrowly focused on immediate business needs, without a full understanding of contractual ownership and system architecture, a critical blind spot. This gap in comprehension would soon become the fulcrum of the professional standoff that unfolded. Despite her rigid stance, Margaret maintained a veneer of procedural correctness, documenting the denial with formal letters and referencing internal policies to justify her decision. She believed this approach insulated her and the company from liability. Yet she neglected the fact that my role came with documented authority over substantial proprietary assets that could not simply be reassigned or overridden, without legal consequence. Derek and I were aligned in recognizing this imbalance of power, but Derek's role as IT manager limited his ability to challenge HR's policy or interfere with administrative decisions. In retrospect, Margaret's rigid enforcement of the no exceptions bereavement policy was a calculated risk driven by short-term cost control objectives. She aimed to maintain productivity by signaling zero tolerance for leave requests that might set a precedent. However, this approach lacked strategic foresight. She did not anticipate that the very assets she underestimated, the licenses and system controls tied to the $3.8 million pipeline, would become instruments of leverage. Nor did she foresee how the legal ownership embedded in license contracts would expose the company to breach of contract claims and fiduciary breaches. This critical oversight of operational and legal dependencies reflected a systemic failure within HR's risk assessment framework. By prioritizing compliance with a narrow policy interpretation over the broader implications of asset control and employee rights, Margaret inadvertently created the conditions for a professional confrontation that would escalate beyond routine personnel management. Her rigid approach disregarded the nuanced intersection of contract law, system administration, and revenue recognition that defined my role. As I reviewed her denial letter and cross-referenced it with client license contracts and system permissions, the extent of her miscalculation became clear. It was not merely a policy enforcement issue. It was a misjudgment of the leverage embedded in my unique position. This realization informed my next steps: to methodically document every relevant detail, consult legal expertise, and prepare for a strategic defense of my professional and personal interests. Margaret's hardline stance unwittingly set in motion a chain of events that would expose the shortcomings of a policy-driven, compliance-first HR mentality disconnected from operational realities and legal frameworks. Ultimately, Margaret's insistence on enforcing a no-exceptions policy, driven by cost-cutting and productivity pressures, failed to account for the proprietary nature of the client licenses I controlled and the substantial legal ownership vested in them. Derek's technical understanding of the system dependencies validated this risk, but lacked the authority to countermand HR decisions. This combination of factors created a critical vulnerability in the company's operational model, a vulnerability that I was uniquely positioned to leverage in defense of my family's financial security and professional integrity. After receiving the formal denial from HR, I immediately focused on thoroughly reviewing the documentation involved in the decision. The denial letter itself was carefully worded, citing business needs and referencing company leave policies that purportedly left no room for exceptions, even for bereavement. While the tone was professional, the content was legally questionable. As someone who makes a point to understand the exact language of policies and contracts, I cross-checked the company's employee handbook, internal leave guidelines, and, importantly, applicable state bereavement laws. In doing so, I identified clear violations. The company's refusal to grant even the minimal 4-day bereavement leave contradicted statutory requirements designed to protect employees in times of family loss. The company's policies, while restrictive, could not legally override these protections. I then turned my attention to the contractual agreements attached to the client licenses under my management. These license agreements are far more than simple usage permissions. They are legally binding contracts that include specific clauses related to ownership rights, transferability, renewal conditions, and termination protocols. Crucially, the contracts contained clauses stipulating that control and ownership of the licenses revert to me under circumstances such as employment termination or suspension of services. This was a key point that HR had overlooked entirely. By ignoring these contractual provisions, the company was exposing itself to potential breach of contract claims. Simultaneously, I conducted a detailed technical review of the system administrative controls related to these licenses. Every license validation and client access operation passed exclusively through credentials that only I possessed. This was not by chance. It was a deliberate design to ensure accountability and security. I accessed system architecture diagrams and credential management logs with Derek's assistance, confirming that no other employee, HR included, had the necessary access rights to manage or transfer these licenses without my involvement. The licenses themselves were interwoven with the company's revenue recognition framework. If validation failed, clients would be unable to use the software, triggering revenue delays and cascading into payroll disruptions for the sales and commission teams. Moreover, I assembled and mapped out email threads documenting internal communications. These exchanges revealed HR's unwavering stance in denying my leave, their refusal to consider exceptions, and their apparent ignorance of the operational and legal implications embedded in my role. The email records showed no attempt at dialogue or accommodation, only repeated reiterations of the business needs justification. This demonstrated a systemic inflexibility that failed to consider employee rights or the broader business impact. Reviewing the employee handbook alongside these communications, I also noted that the company's leave policies explicitly referenced adherence to state laws, which meant that HR's denial was not only harsh, but non-compliant. The handbook included grievance procedures and appeal mechanisms, none of which were offered or mentioned in my case. This procedural omission further solidified the legal risk the company was undertaking. All these factors crystallized into a stark professional assessment. The company's HR department was enforcing a rigid policy that disregarded fundamental legal protections and neglected the unique operational dependencies associated with my position. The denial letter was not just a refusal of leave, it was a catalyst exposing a dissonance between corporate policy enforcement and the realities of contract law and system administration. Understanding this, I realized that the company was dangerously underestimating the leverage embedded in my exclusive control over these client licenses and system credentials. These assets were legally mine to manage and operationally indispensable to the company's revenue pipeline. If mishandled or withdrawn, the repercussions would be severe and unavoidable. This comprehensive review was critical before taking any action. It allowed me to document, in a methodical and professional manner, the precise legal and operational gaps in HR's approach. I archived digital copies of the denial letter, the employee handbook sections, state bereavement statutes, license agreements, and system control diagrams. Each item was labeled, time-stamped, and cross-referenced to build a coherent evidentiary framework. This evidence trail was not just a defensive measure. It was the foundation for a strategic response. By systematically mapping the intersections of policy violations, contractual ownership, and system dependencies, I ensured that any next step would be grounded in incontrovertible facts and legal authority. I knew that maintaining this professionalism and detail would be essential, both to protect my family's interests and to position myself favorably should the conflict escalate into formal legal or regulatory proceedings. In that moment of sober analysis, the path forward became clear. The company's inflexible stance was not only unjust, but also strategically flawed. By ignoring the proprietary rights vested in me and the critical technological dependencies that I solely managed, HR had inadvertently set the stage for operational disruption. My professional role was not merely impacted by policy denial, it was at the nexus of a system whose stability depended on my cooperation. The leverage I held was real, enforceable, and documented. With this clarity, I prepared to move from analysis to action, ensuring that every step taken would reflect the professionalism and precision that had defined my career. The denial was not the endpoint. It was the trigger for a carefully calibrated response grounded in legal and operational realities. After consolidating all the facts, I knew the next critical step was to secure professional legal counsel who could guide me through the complexities ahead. I contacted Mark Whitman, an employment attorney with a strong track record in labor disputes and contract law related to the tech industry. Our initial meeting was deliberately confidential, held off-site to avoid alerting internal stakeholders. I brought with me a comprehensive dossier. The formal denial letters from HR, annotated copies of every client license contract under my control, detailed email threads reflecting the leave denial communications, and system access logs showing the exclusive credentials I held. Sharing this documentation with Mark was a pivotal moment. He methodically reviewed each piece, highlighting not only the statutory violations in the bereavement leave denial, but also the overlooked contractual clauses that vested ownership and control of client licenses with me in specific circumstances. These clauses, often buried in fine print, created an undeniable legal basis that HR had ignored. Mark noted that this oversight could constitute a breach of fiduciary duty on the company's part, particularly given the direct financial implications tied to those licenses. Recognizing the operational aspect was just as important as the legal foundation, I enlisted Derek Caldwell's collaboration. Derek, as IT manager, had unparalleled insight into the technical architecture underpinning our licensing system. Together, we compiled a detailed inventory outlining the full scope of licenses I controlled, the client accounts dependent on them, and the critical system components tied to revenue validation and payroll processing. Derek provided system diagrams, access control matrices, and recent audit logs, each carefully cross-referenced to the contracts and client pipeline valuations. The $3.8 million figure wasn't a vague estimate. It was supported by real-time data extracted from the company's CRM and financial reporting tools. Our combined evidence inventory served multiple purposes. It documented the revenue impact in concrete financial terms, identified precise legal breaches by HR, and mapped operational dependencies that exposed systemic vulnerabilities. I insisted on encrypting backups of all client access credentials, ensuring they were stored securely off-site within a trusted new legal entity we were preparing, an LLC formed specifically to receive these assets should the situation escalate. This preemptive step was not taken lightly. It required careful coordination with Mark and Derek to ensure compliance with both contractual obligations and IT security standards. Mark advised that this layered approach, legal, operational, and technical, would maximize our leverage while minimizing exposure. We pinpointed 3 clear leverage points. First, my exclusive ownership of the client licenses, backed by contract law. Second, HR's documented failure to honor state bereavement leave statutes, which could invite regulatory scrutiny. And third, the technical reality that only I possessed the administrative access necessary to maintain uninterrupted client service and revenue flow. Throughout this planning phase, I maintained strict professional discipline. All communications with Mark and Derek were encrypted and time-stamped. I avoided informal discussions or emotional responses, focusing instead on building an airtight evidence base. At no point did I disclose any of this coordination to HR or other company executives, aware that premature disclosure could trigger preemptive countermeasures. The strategy was to prepare quietly but decisively, ensuring that when the time came, the transfer of licenses and client access would be legally defensible, operationally smooth, and strategically impactful. Behind this deliberate groundwork was a clear objective: protect my family's financial security by securing control over the assets I had meticulously managed for years. The company's refusal to grant my bereavement leave was not just a policy issue, it was a breach that threatened my professional integrity and livelihood. By methodically assembling documentation, legal advice, and technical safeguards, I positioned myself to respond not with confrontation, but with strategic leverage grounded in facts and law. As the confidential consultation concluded, Mark outlined potential next steps, including notifying HR of our concerns while preserving the option to pursue regulatory complaints and legal claims if necessary. Derek finalized the secure transfer plan, detailing the technical process for migrating licenses and client data to the LLC without immediate disruption, but with an inevitable operational impact. I reviewed all materials once more, ensuring every element was aligned with regulatory standards and contractual terms. This phase of strategic preparation was critical. It transformed a personal grievance into a professional case, supported by evidence, legal authority, and operational control. By the time I left the meeting with Mark and Derek, I was confident in our path forward, calm, calculated, and ready to protect what truly mattered with precision and professionalism. My lawyer's review of all the relevant documentation was thorough and illuminating. Mark Whitman, with years of experience in employment law and corporate contract disputes, methodically dissected every document I presented, from the employment contracts and company policy manuals to the client license agreements and system access logs. His initial assessment was clear. The denial of my bereavement leave contravened state bereavement statutes, as well as the company's own written policies. This wasn't a mere procedural oversight by HR. It was a substantive legal violation that exposed the company to potential regulatory sanctions and civil liability. Mark pointed out that state law explicitly protected employees' rights to bereavement leave in defined circumstances, including the passing of immediate family members. The company's refusal to grant even the minimal 4-day leave under the pretext of business needs not only conflicted with these statutes, but also failed to adhere to the grievance and appeal mechanisms outlined in the employee handbook. The HR department, by skipping these mandated procedures, had compounded their legal exposure. This violation formed the foundation of a strong labor complaint, which Mark recommended we prepare to file if necessary. Beyond the employment contracts and leave policies, the lawyer's attention turned sharply to the client license agreements I managed. These contracts, often overlooked by HR, contained explicitly worded ownership clauses. Upon termination or suspension of service contracts, the licenses legally reverted to my control. This wasn't just an internal corporate policy or informal understanding. These were binding contractual rights enforceable under commercial law. Mark emphasized that this contractual ownership was a critical piece of leverage, one that HR had entirely disregarded in their decision-making process. Their failure to recognize these clauses created a significant breach of fiduciary duty on the company's part. Technically, the license management system was designed so that only I possessed the administrative credentials necessary to validate, renew, or transfer client licenses. Derek Caldwell, the IT manager and my trusted confidant, provided extensive technical documentation supporting this fact. We reviewed system architecture diagrams illustrating role-based access controls, credential management logs showing the exclusivity of my access, and audit trails confirming no other employee, including HR or legal, had the permissions needed to perform these critical operations. These dependencies meant that without my active participation, client access would inevitably be disrupted, leading directly to revenue loss. Mark and I also examined the implications of this exclusivity in the context of revenue recognition. Since client license validation was a prerequisite for recognizing revenue streams tied to the $3.8 million pipeline, any interruption would impact the company's financial reporting and, by extension, the payroll system tied to commissions and bonuses. This intersection of contract law, system administration, and financial operations was a vulnerability HR had plainly failed to anticipate. Derek's technical diagrams underscored how the licensing system was the linchpin holding together client service continuity and the company's internal payroll mechanisms. We expanded the review to include internal communications, specifically the email exchanges between HR and me regarding the leave denial. These emails demonstrated HR's rigid stance and refusal to consider exceptions, relying solely on business imperatives without acknowledging legal obligations or operational dependencies. The unyielding tone, coupled with their silence on appeal rights, further reinforced the pattern of procedural and substantive violations. I printed and archived these emails with metadata intact to preserve their evidentiary value. Additionally, the employee handbook explicitly referenced adherence to state labor laws and outlined grievance procedures for leave disputes, none of which HR had followed in my case. This procedural omission was a critical point Mark flagged. It not only violated internal policy, but also undermined the company's defense against any potential legal challenges. The handbook and the state statutes collectively created a robust framework supporting my right to bereavement leave and procedural fairness. Together, we compiled a meticulously detailed evidence dossier: the denial letter, state statutes, employee handbook excerpts, client license contracts with ownership clauses, system access control documentation, and email correspondence. Each document was scanned, time-stamped, and cross-referenced to build a coherent, legally defensible narrative. Mark emphasized the importance of maintaining a strict chain of custody for this evidence to ensure admissibility in any regulatory or judicial proceedings. We implemented encrypted storage protocols and multiple secure backups to prevent tampering or loss. This comprehensive legal and operational review formed the backbone of our strategy. We identified three distinct leverage points. First, the company's violation of state bereavement laws and failure to follow internal grievance procedures. Second, the enforceable contractual ownership of client licenses vested in me. And third, the technical reality that only I had the administrative access required to sustain uninterrupted client service and revenue recognition. These points combined created a formidable position from which to negotiate, or if necessary, litigate. Mark advised that with this evidence firmly in hand, we were prepared to escalate the matter beyond informal dispute resolution. Potential courses of action included filing formal complaints with labor regulators, pursuing breach of contract claims, and asserting fiduciary duty violations. Importantly, the evidence also positioned me to preemptively protect the assets critical to my family's financial security by transferring control of the licenses to a legally separate entity, as we had planned with Derek's cooperation. Throughout this phase, I maintained strict professionalism, ensuring that all interactions remained factual, documented, and free from emotional or confrontational language. I communicated only through formal channels, preserving the integrity of the evidence trail. The meticulous documentation and legal validation transformed what began as a personal grievance into a well-structured strategic case grounded in law, contract rights, and system dependencies. This methodical approach was not only about protecting my legal rights, but also about maintaining operational integrity and professional credibility. Mark stressed that demonstrating adherence to process and evidence-based claims would strengthen our position with regulators, clients, and ultimately, within any legal forum. The intersection of legal counsel, IT expertise, and my detailed documentation created a comprehensive multi-dimensional defense and offense. By the end of the review, I was fully prepared to move forward with decisive, measured steps. The denial of my bereavement leave was not just a policy dispute. It was the opening salvo in a complex challenge involving contractual ownership, system control, and legal compliance. The foundation laid in this phase ensured that every subsequent action would be supported by incontrovertible evidence and strategic clarity, setting the stage for the transfer of licenses and the unfolding professional standoff ahead. Before initiating the actual transfer of licenses and access credentials, I recognized the importance of formally communicating my intentions to the company's human resources and legal departments. This wasn't a step taken lightly or impulsively. It was a calculated move rooted in professionalism, legal foresight, and the necessity to document my position clearly. I drafted a carefully worded notice, emphasizing my commitment to protecting my professional and financial interests amid the denial of my bereavement leave and outlining the rationale behind my forthcoming actions. The letter explicitly referenced the breach of company policy and state bereavement statutes, underscoring the legal violations identified during my comprehensive review. I detailed the contractual clauses in the client license agreements that vested ownership and control of these licenses with me under circumstances such as employment disruption or denial of legitimate leave. This formal notice served multiple strategic purposes. It alerted the company to my awareness of their legal exposure, asserted my ownership rights, and provided an official record that could be referenced in potential regulatory or legal proceedings. Simultaneously, I included a clear statement of intent to transfer the client licenses and associated system access to a newly established legal entity, an LLC formed specifically to safeguard these assets, and by extension, my family's financial security. This entity was structured to be legally distinct from the company's jurisdiction, ensuring that control over the licenses would remain intact, regardless of ongoing corporate disputes. The letter maintained a tone of professionalism and restraint. I avoided any confrontational language, focusing instead on factual assertions and legal grounding. Knowing that timing and discretion were critical, I coordinated with Derek Caldwell, the IT manager and my trusted ally, to finalize the technical details of the transfer process. Derek's expertise was indispensable. He designed a secure encrypted migration path that would ensure the uninterrupted transition of client credentials and licensing data to the LLC's control. We mapped out a phased transfer plan, initial back-end license ownership handover, followed by systematic reconfiguration of system authentication protocols, all done in a manner that minimized immediate operational disruption, but guaranteed long-term company dependence on my continued cooperation. In parallel, I secured alternative employment offers as a contingency. While the transfer was intended as a protective measure for my family, I remained mindful of the potential professional fallout within my current company. Negotiating discreetly with industry contacts, I lined up positions that not only matched, but exceeded my current compensation and provided greater respect for work-life balance. This contingency planning was part of a broader strategy to safeguard my family's financial well-being, regardless of the conflict's trajectory. Throughout this phase, I maintained an unwavering professional demeanor. All communications with HR and legal counsel were conducted through formal channels, primarily email and certified letters, ensuring an unbroken, time-stamped record. I refrained from personal confrontations or unauthorized disclosures, fully aware that maintaining composure was essential to preserving credibility and legal standing. Margaret Lawson and the legal department remained formally notified but uninformed about the full scope of the transfer plan until the process was underway. The company, meanwhile, continued its routine operations, unaware of the impending shift. HR pushed ahead with onboarding replacement hires for my accounts, confident that the licensing and system access would transfer seamlessly as they had assumed in the absence of my cooperation. This underestimation of my unique administrative control was their fundamental blind spot. My formal notice to HR was both a warning shot and a shield, confirming my awareness of the breaches and my readiness to assert my rights while legally protecting me against claims of unauthorized action. By the time the transfer began, the groundwork was meticulously laid. Encrypted backups of all client access credentials, license contracts, and system logs were securely stored within the LLC's infrastructure, compliant with data protection regulations and contractual confidentiality clauses. Derek's technical oversight ensured that every step adhered to IT security protocols, with audit trails capturing every change to preserve chain of custody for potential litigation. The process unfolded with precision. Licenses were reassigned to the LLC account, client access tokens reissued under new credentials controlled exclusively by the LLC, and system authentication servers updated to reflect new administrative ownership. This methodical handoff was designed to be invisible initially, avoiding immediate disruption that might trigger premature detection. Yet, the domino effect was inevitable. Without my cooperation, the company's internal systems would soon encounter validation errors, blocking client access and halting revenue recognition tied to the $3.8 million pipeline. Throughout these developments, I maintained clear boundaries, responding to inquiries from HR or legal counsel only through my attorney, Mark Whitman. All further communications were routed through official channels, reinforcing the legal nature of the dispute and preventing informal negotiations or emotional entanglements. This professional distance also signaled that while I was prepared to protect my interests firmly, I remained open to resolution through proper legal frameworks. By choosing this course, I effectively placed the company at a crossroads: either acknowledge the legal and operational realities I had documented or face escalating service disruptions and potential regulatory interventions. My priority, however, remained unwavering, ensuring that my family's financial security was protected, regardless of corporate resistance. The strategic combination of formal notification, legal counsel involvement, secure technical transfer, and contingency employment planning created a robust, multi-layered defense against the repercussions of HR's inflexible bereavement leave denial. This phase was not about retaliation. It was about professional responsibility and foresight. The formal notice to HR and legal counsel was the linchpin that transitioned the situation from a private grievance to a structured professional challenge. It preserved my rights, documented the company's breaches, and set in motion a carefully controlled transfer of critical assets. The quiet transfer to the LLC marked a pivotal moment, one that kept my family's livelihood secure while placing the company's internal operations on an unavoidable path toward reckoning. At this juncture, the standoff was fully engaged, but the outcome remained uncertain. The company had been formally put on notice. The licenses and system controls were shifting beyond their immediate reach, and I stood ready, backed by legal authority and technical control, to navigate the impending consequences with measured professionalism and strategic resolve. Within days of initiating the transfer, the first signs of disruption began to surface across the company's client-facing systems. The license validation servers, integral to authenticating client software access, started generating errors that had never appeared before. These weren't random glitches, but precise failures directly tied to the credentials and licenses I had quietly migrated to the LLC. Since the corporate system relied exclusively on the administrative access I controlled, the validation process faltered, preventing clients from logging into or fully utilizing the software products they depended on. Almost immediately, key clients reached out to me directly. Despite the tense professional environment, many had developed a rapport with me over years of account management and trusted me as their point of contact. Their inquiries were not angry nor accusatory. They were straightforward requests for resolution. "Alistair, we're seeing login failures and license errors on our end," one client's email read. Another called, concerned about potential downtime impacting critical operations. The tone was urgent yet measured, reflecting the high stakes of uninterrupted service. I took detailed notes on each communication, logging timestamps, client names, and issue descriptions to maintain a transparent record of unfolding events. Meanwhile, within the company, HR and the replacement hires assigned to manage these accounts began to encounter immediate operational challenges. The new personnel lacked the necessary system credentials to restore or reissue licenses, a gap created by the exclusive administrative privileges I held. Attempts to bypass or override the license validation system failed repeatedly, leading to stalled onboarding processes and escalating frustration among frontline support teams. Internal ticketing systems flagged increasing numbers of unresolved issues, and the sales pipeline, normally active and flowing, showed disturbing signs of stagnation. Behind the scenes, the company's payroll systems, which were tightly integrated with revenue recognition linked to the $3.8 million client pipeline, started exhibiting anomalous behavior. Commissions dependent on validated sales contracts were delayed, and automated payroll calculations began to falter. Human resources, ironically the same department that had denied my leave, found themselves grappling with the unintended consequences of that rigid policy. Employee paychecks were at risk, and murmurs of dissatisfaction began circulating among staff. Given the complexity of the license-dependent revenue streams, the payroll disruptions were not easily traced back to a single source, creating operational confusion and urgency. Margaret Lawson, HR Director, quickly became aware of the escalating crisis. I received multiple calls from her office, each one polite, yet increasingly urgent. Her tone shifted from formal to conciliatory, attempting to engage directly with me to understand the root cause of the disruptions. Each call was professionally deflected with a consistent response. "Please direct all inquiries to my legal counsel." This standard protocol ensured that no informal admissions or negotiations occurred, preserving my legal position and reinforcing the professional boundary. Meanwhile, all substantive communications were routed through Mark Whitman, my attorney, who maintained a firm but constructive dialogue with the company's legal team. Internally, the disruption generated a cascade of alarms across multiple departments. Client services escalated issues to executive management, highlighting the risk of contract breaches and reputational damage. Sales leadership expressed concern over stalled deal closures and the potential loss of long-standing clients, now facing service interruptions. The IT department, despite Derek Caldwell's discreet involvement, struggled to address the license validation errors without the necessary administrative credentials, underscoring the operational bottleneck created by the transfer. In parallel, I maintained direct communication with Derek to monitor system logs and license validation statuses in real time. We established a secure reporting protocol that allowed me to track the unfolding impact without interfering in day-to-day support activities. Derek confirmed that license validation failure rates were rising steadily, correlating precisely with the phased license transfer schedule we had executed. This data provided concrete evidence of the tangible operational consequences stemming directly from the exclusive control I exercised. Despite the growing operational chaos, I remained professionally detached and focused on documentation. Every client outreach, every internal disruption report, and every legal correspondence was meticulously logged and archived. This ensured a comprehensive audit trail that would reinforce the integrity of my position should the dispute escalate further. My approach was not punitive. It was methodical and aimed at preserving the financial security of my family while exposing the company's oversight in failing to accommodate legitimate employee rights and operational realities. The unfolding situation also exposed the company's short-sightedness in assuming that replacement personnel could seamlessly manage critical licenses and client relationships without my involvement. Their failure to secure a formal transition plan or to prepare for the legal and technical implications of denying my leave and initiating replacement hires became glaringly apparent. The company's operational resilience was compromised directly due to HR's rigid policy enforcement, which had neglected the interdependence between personnel policies and system administration. As the disruptions persisted, key clients began formally notifying the company of service lapses, some threatening contract reviews or terminations if access issues were not promptly resolved. These communications further increased executive scrutiny and intensified internal pressure on HR and IT departments. The initial quiet transfer of licenses had, within days, triggered a chain reaction leading to financial and operational instability, an outcome HR had neither anticipated nor prepared for. In parallel, payroll systems remained unpredictable, with some employees reporting delayed payments and others receiving incorrect commission statements. This payroll irregularity heightened internal unrest and raised red flags for corporate compliance officers. The direct correlation between revenue recognition failures tied to license validation and payroll disruptions was unmistakable to those analyzing system logs, although attribution required understanding the recent license transfers, a fact tightly controlled and known only to a select few. Throughout this period, I maintained a measured and professional communication posture. I refrained from publicizing the situation or engaging in informal discussions with company personnel, preserving my credibility and strategic position. Instead, I focused on ensuring that all actions were legally defensible, operationally documented, and aligned with the broader goal of protecting my family's livelihood. The company's decision to prioritize rigid policy enforcement over flexibility had inadvertently handed me significant leverage. This evolving professional standoff set the stage for the next phase of the conflict, where legal and regulatory pressures would compound the operational challenges. The company, caught off guard by the systemic impact of my exclusive control over licenses and client access, faced mounting internal and external consequences. My quiet, calculated transfer had disrupted the revenue pipeline and payroll mechanisms that kept employees paid and the business running, an escalation that underscored the critical importance of recognizing and respecting employee rights in the context of complex operational dependencies. Simultaneously, as the operational disruptions unfolded, labor regulators initiated formal investigations into the company's bereavement leave policies. These inquiries were prompted by my detailed complaint, submitted through counsel, which outlined how HR's refusal to grant the legally mandated 4-day bereavement leave violated state labor laws. The regulatory bodies requested comprehensive documentation from the company, including leave policies, denial letters, and records of employee grievances. This development added a significant layer of external pressure on the company's human resources department, exposing them to potential fines and sanctions that could compound internal operational difficulties. In parallel, I proceeded to file formal legal actions, asserting breach of contract and fiduciary duty claims against the company. The breach of contract suit was grounded in the clear violation of both the company's stated leave policies and applicable state statutes protecting bereavement leave rights. My complaint emphasized that HR's rigid business needs justification not only contravened these regulations, but also ignored procedural requirements such as grievance handling and appeal opportunities explicitly outlined in the employee handbook. This procedural failure amplified the company's legal exposure. More critically, the fiduciary duty claim focused on the company's failure to appropriately manage and respect the contractual ownership rights vested in me concerning the client licenses. These licenses, integral to the company's $3.8 million pipeline revenue, included clauses granting me ownership upon employment disruption or contract suspension, provisions that HR blatantly disregarded. By attempting to replace me without recognizing these contractual realities, the company breached its fiduciary responsibilities, jeopardizing client relationships, revenue continuity, and operational integrity. Supporting these claims, my attorney submitted exhaustive exhibits, the formal leave denial letter, annotated excerpts from state labor codes, the company's employee handbook, and the full set of client license agreements highlighting ownership clauses. Additionally, detailed system logs provided by Derek Caldwell demonstrated the exclusive administrative access I maintained over the licensing system and corroborated the integrity of the transfer process. These logs included time-stamped entries of credential handovers and system authentication changes, underscoring the technical realities ignored by HR. As the legal documentation solidified, I discreetly notified select key clients about potential service interruptions stemming from the ongoing licensing transitions. This communication was carefully crafted to maintain professionalism and client confidence, emphasizing my commitment to uninterrupted service despite the internal corporate dispute. The clients' responses were mixed but generally understanding, many expressing concern, yet appreciating the transparency. Some began re-evaluating their contracts, factoring the disruption risk into ongoing negotiations. This client uncertainty added financial strain to the company's predicament. Meanwhile, Derek's ongoing system audits confirmed that unauthorized access attempts and failed license validations were increasing, directly correlating with the phased transfer of credentials to the LLC. These technical findings documented how the company's operational continuity depended unequivocally on my cooperation. Without my administrative access, IT and HR teams were unable to circumvent the licensing controls, despite mounting pressure to restore normalcy. This technical deadlock underscored the strategic leverage embedded in my position. Facing mounting operational, legal, and regulatory pressures, Margaret Lawson, the HR director, initiated contact to propose settlement discussions. Her approach was markedly conciliatory, a shift from her previously rigid stance. In her communications, she acknowledged the company's precarious position and expressed a desire to resolve the dispute amicably, including offering to reinstate me under negotiated terms. These overtures were delivered through formal channels, carefully worded to preserve legal protections, while signaling a willingness to cooperate. Throughout these exchanges, I maintained a professional and measured demeanor. I refrained from direct negotiations or informal conversations, instead delegating all correspondence to my legal counsel. My consistent response was, "My lawyers will be in touch." This statement was deliberate, asserting control over the dialogue, avoiding premature commitments, and signaling readiness to pursue the case fully if necessary. By doing so, I preserved strategic flexibility and communicated that any resolution would require acknowledgement of the documented breaches and appropriate remediation. At this stage, the situation had escalated well beyond an internal HR dispute. The company was confronted with simultaneous regulatory investigations, costly legal actions, operational disruptions affecting millions in revenue, and client contract instability. The mounting evidence, meticulously compiled and professionally presented, left little room for the company to dismiss or downplay the severity of their position. My calm, evidence-based approach ensured that every claim was substantiated, legally sound, and operationally impactful. From an internal perspective, the unfolding events triggered ripple effects across departments. Legal teams began preparing for potential litigation and regulatory hearings, while HR faced scrutiny from executive leadership over their handling of employee rights and policy enforcement. Finance departments grappled with revenue recognition uncertainties due to the licensing interruptions, and client services worked to manage escalating dissatisfaction. The company's organizational cohesion was strained, illustrating how rigid policy enforcement, without regard for operational realities and legal protections, can precipitate wide-reaching professional consequences. Despite the increased pressure, I remained focused on documentation and strategic patience. Every client communication, internal memo, legal filing, and technical log was archived with rigorous attention to chain of custody protocols, ensuring admissibility and credibility. This discipline not only strengthened my legal position, but also reinforced my reputation as a professional with unwavering integrity, one who sought resolution through facts, law, and careful planning, rather than emotion or confrontation. In summary, the convergence of labor regulatory scrutiny, formal legal filings, rising client concerns, and escalating operational failures created a multifaceted challenge for the company. Margaret's earlier dismissal of my leave request, grounded in short-term business considerations, had inadvertently sparked a professional and legal crisis. By leveraging my exclusive control over critical client licenses and embedding my claims within a robust evidentiary framework, I effectively transformed a personal grievance into a strategic assertion of rights. While settlement discussions had begun, the ultimate resolution remained contingent on the company's recognition of the documented breaches and willingness to address the systemic implications of their policies and actions. Margaret Lawson's termination came as a direct result of the mounting investigations and escalating internal turmoil triggered by HR's mishandling of my bereavement leave request and the subsequent licensing transfer. The company's executive leadership, under increasing pressure from regulatory bodies and legal counsel, recognized that her rigid enforcement of the no-leave policy, coupled with her failure to consider contractual and operational realities, had exposed the firm to significant liability. Official statements cited breach of procedural duty and failure to adhere to compliance standards as grounds for her dismissal. This move was intended both as damage control and a clear signal to employees and external observers that the company acknowledged the severity of its errors in HR management. Financial repercussions soon followed. Regulatory fines levied against the company exceeded $500,000, stemming primarily from violations of state bereavement leave statutes and procedural non-compliance demonstrated by documented internal communications and legal filings. These penalties were compounded by substantial client losses, which mounting evidence showed had reached over $2 million in lost revenue. Clients who had experienced repeated software access disruptions and delays in contract fulfillment chose to terminate or renegotiate agreements, citing breach of service level expectations grounded in the licensing disruptions I had documented. The financial impact extended beyond lost sales. It affected the company's market reputation and creditworthiness, leading to tighter scrutiny from investors and board members. Internal chaos deepened as the payroll systems, intricately tied to the revenue recognition of my $3.8 million pipeline, experienced severe disruptions. Automated commission calculations and bonus disbursements stalled, creating payroll delays that affected multiple employee cycles. Numerous employees reported late payments, incorrect paycheck amounts, and missing commission statements, sparking dissatisfaction and confusion. The HR department, ironically the original source of the conflict, was now overwhelmed by inquiries and complaints from staff, many of whom were unaware of the underlying licensing transfer, but felt the tangible impact on their finances. The payroll freeze rippled through departments, eroding morale and prompting urgent meetings among finance, operations, and HR teams to identify and resolve the root causes. Meanwhile, additional cases emerged as other employees, emboldened by my legal action and the heightened regulatory scrutiny, came forward to report wrongful leave denials and policy abuses. These claims expanded the scope of the investigations, prompting labor regulators to conduct comprehensive audits of the company's HR policies and leave management processes. The cumulative effect was a broad exposure of systemic weaknesses within the company's human resources framework, undermining confidence in leadership and forcing a re-evaluation of personnel protocols. Industry observers took notice of the unfolding scandal. Trade journals and tech sector publications highlighted the company's failures, detailing the sequence of events, from HR's inflexible leave denial to the operational disruptions caused by exclusive license control. Coverage framed the situation as a cautionary tale about the dangers of rigid corporate policies that disregard employee rights and the critical importance of integrating legal, technical, and human factors in organizational decisions. The negative press further damaged the company's brand, complicating client retention efforts and recruitment initiatives amid a competitive market. On the personal front, the stress and upheaval had unintended consequences. My estranged spouse initiated divorce proceedings during this tumultuous period. However, the comprehensive documentation I maintained, detailing my exclusive control over client licenses, financial accounts, and the strategic transfer to the LLC, proved decisive in asset division negotiations. Legal representation emphasized the thorough record-keeping and the financial foresight that safeguarded the family's economic interests. This professional diligence ensured that, despite the personal challenges, my financial position remained secure and supported the ongoing well-being of those dependent on me. Throughout these developments, I sustained a professional demeanor, continuing to communicate solely through my attorney, while meticulously documenting every new development. Internal company communications revealed attempts to stabilize operations, including expedited recruitment of replacement hires and emergency technical audits. But the systemic damage was entrenched. Senior management convened crisis meetings to assess regulatory compliance risks, client retention strategies, and financial recovery plans, evidencing the depth of disruption precipitated by the initial HR inflexibility. In sum, Margaret's termination was one node in a cascade of professional consequences that reverberated through the company's financial, operational, and reputational frameworks. The regulatory fines and client revenue losses quantified the tangible costs of HR's misjudgment, while payroll disruptions and employee grievances underscored the human toll. Industry exposure and personal ramifications further complicated the fallout. The company now faced an imperative to overhaul HR policies, enhance system access controls, and rebuild trust internally and externally, all while navigating the legal and financial ramifications of the standoff initiated by my strategic, documented response to an unjust leave denial. By the time the court proceedings concluded, the rulings decisively favored my claims on multiple fronts. The judiciary awarded me $450,000 in damages, recognizing both the emotional distress caused by the wrongful denial of bereavement leave and the financial harm inflicted by the company's breach of contractual and fiduciary duties. Beyond monetary compensation, the court granted full severance benefits as stipulated in my original employment contract, affirming the legitimacy of my claims and penalizing the company for its procedural failings. Most significantly, the court upheld my ownership rights over the client licenses I had transferred to the LLC, rights explicitly embedded in the contractual clauses that Margaret's HR department had disregarded. These licenses were not merely symbolic. They represented the backbone of a $3.8 million pipeline that directly impacted ongoing revenue streams and operational stability. The legal affirmation of license ownership was a critical strategic victory. It effectively neutralized any attempts by the company to reclaim or sabotage the transferred assets, securing my family's financial future through enforceable legal protections. The court's detailed opinion cited the explicit language of the license agreements, the documented exclusivity of my administrative access, and the company's failure to observe proper employee leave protocols, all forming a coherent narrative of responsibility and rights. This ruling set a precedent within the company, underscoring that contractual ownership and operational control cannot be overridden by rigid HR policies or managerial fiat. Simultaneously, state and federal regulatory bodies imposed substantial sanctions on the company. Their investigations corroborated my legal claims, highlighting systematic violations of labor laws related to bereavement leave and procedural failings in handling employee grievances. The regulatory fines exceeded $500,000, reflecting the severity of non-compliance and the company's disregard for statutory protections. Moreover, these sanctions mandated a comprehensive review and overhaul of the company's human resources policies, including the introduction of clear, documented leave procedures and stronger oversight mechanisms to prevent future violations. The regulatory spotlight intensified scrutiny from shareholders and industry watchdogs, raising the stakes for corporate governance reforms. Margaret Lawson, the HR director who had personally enforced the no-leave policy, faced professional consequences commensurate with her role in the controversy. Following a formal internal review, and in light of mounting external pressures, she was terminated for failure to adhere to compliance standards and breach of fiduciary duty. The company's public statements emphasized a commitment to accountability and transparency, attributing her dismissal to procedural lapses and a lack of proportionality in policy enforcement. Beyond the termination, Margaret received a professional blacklist from key industry associations, effectively curtailing her career prospects in human resources management within the sector. This disciplinary action sent a clear message about the professional risks of prioritizing rigid policy adherence over legal and ethical considerations. Client relationships, long the foundation of my pipeline, reacted decisively to the unfolding events. Several key clients permanently severed ties with the company, citing persistent service disruptions and concerns over management instability. Their decisions were informed not merely by operational interruptions, but by an erosion of trust in the company's ability to honor contractual obligations and safeguard service continuity. The financial impact was significant. Client attrition accounted for over $2 million in lost revenue, exacerbating the company's fiscal challenges and prompting an urgent need for strategic restructuring. Industry competitors took note of these shifts, leveraging the opportunity to court former clients and expand their market share. Within the company, the fallout triggered substantial organizational changes. Executive leadership initiated a comprehensive restructuring to stabilize operations, restore client confidence, and repair the damage wrought by the crisis. This included revising corporate governance protocols, strengthening cross-departmental communication channels, and instituting robust compliance training. The company also committed to upgrading system access controls to mitigate risks associated with exclusive administrative privileges, recognizing the vulnerabilities exposed by my strategic transfer of licenses. These reforms aim to reconcile operational security with employee rights, establishing frameworks that balanced business continuity with legal compliance. On a personal level, the resolution of the legal disputes enabled me to transition smoothly into a new role at a direct competitor. The position came with a 25% salary increase and an equity stake, reflecting both my professional value and the industry's recognition of the strategic expertise I brought. My new employer demonstrated a corporate culture that respected work-life balance and employee rights, aligning with my priorities after the difficult experience. This transition was supported by my documented track record and the clear vindication provided by the courts and regulatory agencies. The industry at large responded to the case as a cautionary benchmark. Several firms reviewed and revised their bereavement leave policies, implementing clearer guidelines that balanced operational demands with employee welfare. System access controls became a focal point for IT and compliance teams, emphasizing the risks inherent in single points of failure and exclusive administrative access. Professional associations hosted forums and workshops addressing the intersection of human resources management, contract law, and system administration, highlighting the necessity for integrated approaches to prevent similar crises. My experience was cited in thought leadership articles advocating for strategic documentation, legal literacy, and professional patience as essential tools for employees navigating complex corporate landscapes. Throughout this period, I maintained a focus on professionalism and strategic clarity. The court's affirmations and regulatory sanctions reinforced the principle that well-documented contractual rights and operational control can serve as effective leverage against unfair corporate practices. The case underscored the importance of meticulous record-keeping, comprehensive understanding of contract terms, and the deployment of legal counsel to navigate disputes. It also demonstrated that corporate HR policies, no matter how rigid, are subject to legal and ethical constraints that must be respected to preserve organizational integrity. In essence, the legal and professional outcomes validated the approach I had taken from the outset, grounded in calm, evidence-based strategy rather than emotional reaction. The convergence of judicial decisions, regulatory actions, and industry reforms turned what began as a personal grievance into a catalyst for systemic change. My ability to leverage exclusive license ownership and operational control, supported by exhaustive documentation and legal guidance, established a blueprint for managing corporate conflict with precision and professionalism. Now, as I lead the strategic sales division at a top competitor, the professional landscape around me has transformed profoundly. My new role not only offers a 30% increase in base salary, but also includes an equity stake, reflecting the market's recognition of the expertise I honed, managing complex client pipelines and navigating operational intricacies. This isn't merely about compensation. It signifies a fundamental shift to a corporate culture that values and respects the balance between professional excellence and personal priorities, something I had to fight for. The transition to this new environment was planned meticulously, ensuring no disruption to my family's financial security. From the outset, I prioritized aligning with a company that demonstrated a genuine commitment to employee welfare, including flexible leave policies and robust work-life balance initiatives. These values were non-negotiable. After the previous ordeal, I understood that professional success must not come at the expense of family well-being. This mindset shaped my negotiation strategy, leveraging my documented track record and the legal affirmations of my proprietary rights over client licenses to secure terms that honored these principles. My current role involves overseeing a portfolio even broader than before, but this time the management framework integrates lessons learned from my prior experience. I have implemented enhanced documentation protocols and system access controls that ensure not only operational efficiency, but also risk mitigation. Every client license agreement is meticulously reviewed, with ownership rights explicitly negotiated and recorded, preventing ambiguities that could lead to future disputes. System credentials are managed with multi-layer authentication and shared responsibilities, eliminating single points of failure. I work closely with IT and legal teams to maintain this rigor, reinforcing a culture of transparency and accountability. Beyond my corporate responsibilities, I have expanded my professional footprint by establishing a consulting practice, specializing in license management and corporate compliance. This venture leverages the comprehensive knowledge I accumulated, offering strategic advisory services to firms seeking to fortify their contract administration and IT governance frameworks. The practice emphasizes proactive risk identification, contract clause optimization, and integration of legal and technical controls, areas where I faced significant challenges and gained invaluable insights. This side venture not only supplements my income, but also amplifies my professional influence across the industry. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, the value of meticulous documentation stands out unmistakably. Every contract clause, every email, every system log created a latticework of evidence that ultimately protected my interests and those of my family. It reinforced that professional diligence is not bureaucratic overhead, but a strategic asset. Understanding the full scope of contractual language and system dependencies allowed me to identify leverage points that were invisible to others. This knowledge transformed what initially seemed like a personal hardship into an opportunity to assert rightful control and catalyze organizational accountability. Strategic patience was equally critical. By maintaining composure and channeling efforts into building an indisputable legal and operational case, I preserved credibility and avoided actions that could be construed as impulsive or unprofessional. This approach ensured that each move was defensible, measured, and aligned with long-term objectives. It also prevented escalation into reckless confrontation, allowing the situation to unfold within legal and regulatory frameworks that ultimately favored a just outcome. Professionally, these experiences deepened my understanding of the intricate interplay between human resources policies, contract law, and IT systems administration. I now advocate strongly for integrated corporate governance approaches that recognize these intersections. Organizations must balance policy enforcement with empathy and legal compliance, ensuring employee rights are respected without compromising operational integrity. The industry's response, revising leave policies strengthening system access controls, and hosting educational forums reflects a broader acknowledgement of these lessons. Ultimately, this journey affirmed a fundamental truth. Protecting what sustains your family requires foresight, strategic thinking, and unwavering professionalism, not emotional reaction. Navigating complex corporate disputes demands a clear head and a well-structured plan grounded in evidence and law. Every document maintained, every communication carefully crafted, and every legal consultation secured contributed to a resilient defense that safeguarded my family's future. As I continue this chapter, I carry forward these principles daily. I mentor colleagues on the importance of rigorous documentation and legal literacy, emphasizing that professional strength lies in preparedness and patience. The balance I now enjoy between a rewarding career, financial security, and meaningful family time is the direct result of strategic choices made under pressure. This is not just a personal victory. It is a professional blueprint for anyone facing the challenge of protecting their livelihood in environments that may not always value human considerations. In the end, my story is not about conflict. It is about leveraging expertise, documentation, and strategic patience to ensure justice and superior outcomes, demonstrating that professionalism coupled with foresight is the most powerful tool one can wield.